Welcome to Norton Investigates. I'm Edward Norton, and today I'm witnessing what may prove to be the most consequential strategic miscalculation in American foreign policy since the Cuban Missile Crisis. What appears on the surface to be a routine arms transfer actually represents nothing less than the systematic militarization of the Taiwan Strait, a decision that renders peaceful resolution of cross-strait tensions increasingly impossible while accelerating the timeline toward direct military confrontation between the world's two largest economies. This is not speculation or alarmism. This is a careful analysis of what these weapon systems mean, what capabilities they provide, and why their deployment fundamentally alters the strategic landscape in ways that constrain options for everyone involved. On December 17, 2025, the Trump administration approved an $11.1 billion weapons package for Taiwan. Officially, this represents the largest arms sale in the history of United States-Taiwan relations, but more significantly, it constitutes a comprehensive transformation of Taiwan's military capabilities that fundamentally alters the strategic calculus governing potential Chinese military action, while simultaneously constraining American diplomatic flexibility in ways that may prove irreversible once these weapon systems become operational. The magnitude of this arms transfer transcends traditional metrics of military assistance and enters the realm of systematic strategic repositioning that challenges the foundational assumptions underlying 4 decades of carefully managed ambiguity in United States-China-Taiwan relations. For decades, American policy has walked a delicate line, acknowledging Chinese claims while maintaining unofficial support for Taiwan's autonomous governance. This arms sale threatens to demolish that carefully constructed balance. When I examine the specific weapon systems included in this package, I observe not defensive equipment designed to deter aggression, but offensive capabilities explicitly engineered to project power deep into Chinese territory while creating tactical advantages that could only be meaningful in scenarios involving direct military confrontation with People's Liberation Army forces. The centerpiece of this package consists of 82 high-mobility artillery rocket systems and 420 Army tactical missile systems. These are the same HIMARS and ATACMS combinations that have proven devastatingly effective against Russian forces in Ukraine, now positioned to provide Taiwan with precision strike capabilities extending 300 kilometers beyond its coastline, well into China's southeastern provinces, where major population centers, industrial facilities, and military installations are concentrated. The strategic implications of positioning these weapon systems in Taiwan represent a fundamental escalation in the militarization of what Chinese leadership considers an internal territorial dispute. This transforms the island from a defensive stronghold into an offensive platform capable of threatening Chinese mainland infrastructure, military installations, and population centers in ways that Beijing cannot tolerate without appearing to accept permanent division of Chinese territory. When Chinese officials describe this arms sale as undermining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, they are articulating not diplomatic rhetoric designed for international consumption, but genuine strategic reality as perceived from Beijing. These weapon systems create tactical capabilities that make peaceful reunification scenarios increasingly implausible, while forcing Chinese military planners to develop contingencies that assume American weapons will be used against Chinese territory in any future conflict scenario. This fundamentally changes how both sides must plan for potential confrontation. The timing of this arms sale reveals the depth of strategic confusion that characterizes the current approach to great power competition. The administration is simultaneously pursuing what it describes as improved trade relations with Beijing, while systematically undermining the strategic foundations that make such cooperation possible. This contradiction exposes a fundamental misunderstanding of how military capabilities shape diplomatic possibilities, particularly in territorial disputes, where the introduction of advanced weapon systems creates irreversible facts on the ground that constrain future negotiating positions for all parties involved. The announcement of this arms package occurred during the same week that administration officials were publicly discussing potential summit meetings with Xi Jinping, revealing a foreign policy apparatus that fails to comprehend how military and diplomatic strategies intersect in contemporary great power competition. You cannot offer one hand in friendship while arming your partner's adversary with the other and expect to be taken seriously at the negotiating table. When I analyzed the specific capabilities these weapons provide Taiwan, I observed the systematic construction of what military strategists term anti-access area denial capacity, specifically designed to complicate Chinese military operations in the Taiwan Strait while providing Taiwan with the ability to inflict significant costs on any invasion attempt. The HIMARS systems proven in Ukraine against Russian armored formations offer Taiwan mobile, survival platforms capable of engaging Chinese amphibious forces during the most vulnerable phases of any invasion attempt, when troops are loaded onto transport vessels and crossing open water where they make perfect targets. The ATACMS missiles provide precision strike capabilities against Chinese airfields, ports, and command centers that would be essential for sustaining any cross-strait military operation. This represents not merely defensive modernization that maintains current balance of power, but the creation of tactical capabilities that could prove decisive in determining the outcome of potential military confrontation. The Ukrainian precedent looms large in understanding both the tactical effectiveness and strategic risks associated with deploying these weapon systems in Taiwan. HIMARS platforms have demonstrated remarkable effectiveness against Russian forces, not merely through their precision and mobility, but through their psychological impact on military planning and civilian morale. Russian commanders learned to fear the distinctive signature of HIMARS strikes, and entire logistical networks had to be restructured to account for their reach. However, the strategic context of Taiwan differs fundamentally from Ukraine in ways that multiply both the potential effectiveness and the escalatory risks associated with these weapons. Unlike Ukraine, which shares extensive land borders with NATO countries that facilitate weapons resupply and personnel evacuation, Taiwan represents a geographically isolated theater where resupply would depend entirely on American willingness and capability to maintain sea and air corridors under active Chinese military pressure. Taiwan is an island, and islands can be blockaded in ways that land-connected territories cannot. The industrial and technological dimensions of this arms transfer reveal the extent to which American credibility is being wagered on Taiwan's capacity to effectively integrate and employ these advanced systems under combat conditions that would far exceed anything experienced in Ukraine. HIMARS. Effectiveness depends not merely on the platforms themselves, but on comprehensive intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance capabilities, real-time targeting information, and sophisticated logistics networks that must function under the kind of comprehensive electronic warfare and cyber attacks that China would certainly employ in any Taiwan conflict scenario. The $1.01 billion tactical mission network software included in this package represents recognition that weapons effectiveness depends as much on information integration as physical firepower, but also creates vulnerabilities that Chinese cyber capabilities could potentially exploit to devastating effect. China's response to this arms sale demonstrates the strategic sophistication that American policymakers consistently underestimate when developing policies toward Beijing. Rather than engaging in purely rhetorical condemnation that could be easily dismissed as diplomatic theater, Chinese authorities have implemented targeted sanctions against 20 American defense companies and 10 executives specifically involved in Taiwan arms transfers, creating direct and measurable costs for American corporations while establishing precedents for broader economic retaliation against American business interests. This response reveals Chinese strategic thinking that emphasizes long-term pressure campaigns rather than immediate dramatic escalation. The goal is to increase the domestic American costs associated with Taiwan military support while avoiding actions that would justify broader American mobilization or unite American public opinion against China. The economic warfare dimension of China's retaliation strategy extends beyond immediate sanctions to encompass systematic efforts to reduce American technological advantages through accelerated domestic development programs, alternative supplier relationships, and strategic partnerships with other major powers who share concerns about American hegemony. When Chinese officials describe American arms sales as bringing fire upon itself, they articulate a comprehensive strategy that encompasses economic, technological, and military responses designed to demonstrate that American military support for Taiwan creates costs that exceed any strategic benefits Washington might achieve. This approach reflects Chinese confidence that extended competition favors Beijing's advantages in manufacturing capacity, economic integration with global supply chains, and strategic patience over American advantages in advanced technology and alliance relationships that require constant maintenance and renewal. The domestic American political dynamics surrounding this arms sale reveal the extent to which Taiwan policy has become instrumentalized for partisan advantage rather than grounded in coherent strategic analysis of long-term American interests in East Asian stability. Previous criticism of Taiwan, including statements that the island stole America's chip industry and should pay for American protection, created expectations that a more transactional approach to cross-strait relations might emerge. Instead, this record arms sale suggests that domestic political pressures from congressional hawks and defense industry lobbying have overwhelmed whatever strategic flexibility might have been preferred in managing United States-China relations. The defense industrial complex's role in shaping Taiwan policy deserves particular scrutiny, as companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and General Dynamics have obvious commercial interests in maximizing arms sales regardless of their strategic implications for broader relations, between the world's two largest economies. The $11.1 billion Taiwan package represents not merely government policy, but corporate profit opportunities that create ongoing institutional pressure for continued militarization of cross-strait tensions. This dynamic ensures that even if future American administrations seek to de-escalate military competition with China, they will confront powerful domestic constituencies with financial interests in maintaining high levels of tension and continued weapons transfers. Defense contractors employ workers in congressional districts across the country. They fund campaigns, they hire former government officials as lobbyists, and they have every incentive to promote policies that generate additional orders for their products, regardless of whether those policies serve broader national interests. Taiwan's own strategic calculations reveal the island's recognition that military deterrence represents its only viable strategy for maintaining autonomous governance in the face of growing Chinese pressure, but also demonstrates how arms purchases create irreversible commitments to military solutions rather than diplomatic flexibility. Taiwan's announcement of an additional $40 billion defense budget covering 2026 through 2033 represents the systematic militarization of Taiwanese society in ways that make peaceful accommodation with Beijing increasingly difficult for any future Taiwanese leadership to pursue, even if they wish to explore diplomatic alternatives. This dynamic creates what strategists term entrapment scenarios, where allies become locked into confrontational policies that serve their immediate security needs, but undermine long-term stability and foreclose potential off-ramps from escalating tensions. The asymmetric warfare strategy that these weapons enable reflects sophisticated American military thinking about how smaller forces can impose disproportionate costs on larger adversaries, but also reveals the dangerous assumption that tactical advantages can substitute for strategic solutions to fundamental political conflicts. The concept of porcupine defense that underlies American military assistance to Taiwan presumes that inflicting sufficient costs on potential invaders can deter military action indefinitely, making the island too painful to swallow, even if it cannot be too strong to defeat. But this approach fundamentally misunderstands how territorial disputes operate when one party views the territory as inalienably part of its sovereign territory rather than an optional strategic objective that can be abandoned when costs become excessive. China views Taiwan the way America might view Hawaii if it declared independence and allied with a hostile power. No amount of military cost would be considered too high to prevent such an outcome. The psychological and political dimensions of this arms sale extend beyond immediate military capabilities to encompass broader questions about American credibility and Chinese resolve in what both sides increasingly view as a zero-sum competition for regional dominance. From Washington's perspective, providing Taiwan with advanced military capabilities demonstrates American commitment to democratic allies and partners, while signaling to other regional actors, including Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and Australia, that the United States remains a reliable security provider despite growing Chinese pressure and questions about American staying power. However, from Beijing's perspective, American arms sales represent systematic efforts to prevent Chinese reunification through military means, justifying whatever measures prove necessary to overcome American obstruction and achieve what Chinese leaders describe as the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. The regional implications of this arms sale reverberate throughout East Asia in ways that complicate alliance relationships and strategic planning for every major power with interests in regional stability. Japan's recent announcement of record defense spending and explicit willingness to intervene militarily if China attacks Taiwan demonstrates how American arms sales create pressure for broader regional militarization that may exceed American capacity to manage or control. Once unleashed, these dynamics take on momentum of their own. South Korea faces increasingly difficult choices between economic relationships with China, its largest trading partner, and security relationships with the United States, its treaty ally, as regional military tensions escalate beyond levels that can be managed through traditional diplomatic channels. The technological dimension of United States-Taiwan. Military cooperation extends beyond immediate weapons transfers to encompass longer-term strategic relationships in semiconductor production, advanced manufacturing, and emerging technologies that Chinese leadership views as essential for national development and security. Taiwan's dominance in semiconductor manufacturing, producing over 90% of the world's most advanced chips, creates additional complexity and great power competition. Military conflict that damages Taiwanese production capabilities would create global economic disruption far exceeding the direct costs of military confrontation, potentially triggering worldwide recession and technological stagnation. This dynamic means that Chinese military planning must account not merely for tactical objectives related to territorial control, but for strategic consequences affecting global economic integration and technological development that would inevitably redound against China itself. When I examine the timeline implications of this arms delivery schedule, I observe a narrowing window for diplomatic resolution of cross-strait tensions before military capabilities create irreversible strategic realities. The first HIMARS systems are expected to become operational in Taiwan during 2026, with full deployment extending through 2028, creating a period of maximum vulnerability and potential miscalculation as both Chinese and American forces adapt to new tactical realities. Chinese military planning must account for degrading tactical advantages as American weapon systems become operational, potentially creating incentives for accelerated action rather than extended patience. Military planners on both sides are certainly running scenarios that consider whether acting before these systems are fully integrated might be preferable to waiting until Taiwan's defensive capabilities reach their maximum potential. The escalation dynamics embedded in this arms relationship extend beyond the immediate capabilities provided to Taiwan toward broader questions about American willingness to provide increasingly sophisticated weapon systems as the security competition intensifies. As Chinese military pressure grows, the logic of deterrence through strength creates momentum toward providing whatever weapons prove necessary to maintain tactical balance, potentially including systems that cross Chinese red lines regarding offensive capabilities positioned near Chinese territory. This dynamic could include advanced aircraft, naval systems, or even missile defense technologies that Chinese leadership would view as intolerable threats requiring military response before they become operational. The intelligence and reconnaissance requirements for effectively employing these weapon systems create additional vulnerabilities and escalation risks that extend beyond Taiwan itself to encompass American intelligence assets throughout the region. HIMARS. Effectiveness depends on real-time targeting intelligence that requires satellite reconnaissance, signals intelligence, and human intelligence capabilities the Chinese forces would certainly target in any conflict scenario. This means that American military support for Taiwan creates automatic involvement in any cross-strait conflict through intelligence operations that Chinese forces would view as legitimate military targets, potentially triggering direct confrontation between American and Chinese forces, even if policymakers on both sides wish to limit the scope of any conflict. The broader implications for United States-China relations extend beyond immediate military concerns to encompass fundamental questions about whether great power competition can remain below the threshold of direct military confrontation when territorial disputes involve such existential stakes for both parties. The Taiwan issue represents what international relations theorists term a commitment problem, where both sides have vital interests that cannot be compromised without appearing to accept strategic defeat. American arms sales increase the costs China would face in any military solution, while simultaneously reducing Chinese confidence that peaceful reunification remains achievable through patience and economic integration, the strategy Beijing has pursued for decades. As I analyze the trajectory established by this arms sale, I observe the systematic foreclosure of diplomatic alternatives in favor of military solutions that neither side can fully control once initiated. The weapon systems included in this package are not designed for defensive operations that preserve status quo arrangements, but for offensive capabilities that would prove meaningful only in scenarios involving direct military confrontation with Chinese forces. This reality means that every dollar spent on these weapons represents investment in military solutions rather than diplomatic alternatives, creating institutional momentum toward confrontation regardless of changing political circumstances or the preferences of future leaders who might wish to pursue different approaches. The ultimate tragedy of this strategic trajectory lies in its futility as a long-term solution to fundamental questions about Taiwan's relationship with mainland China. Military deterrence can delay resolution of territorial disputes, but cannot eliminate the underlying political pressures that create territorial claims. Chinese demographic, economic, and military advantages will continue growing over time, while American capacity to maintain military balance in the Taiwan Strait faces increasing cost and complexity as distance and logistics favor the closer power. The current arms sale represents not sustainable strategy, but tactical postponement of fundamental decisions about how cross-strait relations can be structured to accommodate both Chinese territorial claims and Taiwanese autonomous governance in ways that avoid catastrophic military confrontation. What I am witnessing on Norton Investigates today represents more than arms transfer or military modernization. This is the systematic construction of conditions that make military confrontation between nuclear powers increasingly likely while reducing the diplomatic space necessary for avoiding such confrontation. The $11.1 billion Taiwan arms package may be remembered not as successful deterrence policy, but as the moment when American and Chinese leaders definitively chose military solutions over diplomatic accommodation, with consequences that will shape global politics for generations and potentially trigger the first direct military confrontation between nuclear superpowers since the world held its breath during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The countdown toward military confrontation has begun, driven not by inevitable forces of history, but by policy choices that prioritize tactical advantage over strategic wisdom, creating momentum toward conflict that may prove impossible to reverse once these weapons become operational. And both sides discover that military strength cannot substitute for political solutions to fundamental disputes over sovereignty, territory, and great power status in the emerging multipolar international system. I'm Edward Norton, and this has been Norton Investigates. Thank you for watching.